Everyone, and welcome. AI is everywhere these days, but have you ever thought about how we make sure it's used responsibly?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's a pretty big deal, right? So that's exactly what we're diving into today. AI governance.
He's like, how do we set the ground rules for this whole AI thing?
Exactly. Think of it like a guidebook for the Wild West of artificial intelligence.
I like that.
So to help us unpack all of this, we're going to be looking at this paper by Dominic Liggett.
Oh yeah, Liggett's work is great. Really lays out a framework for how we can develop AI responsibly.
And this isn't just for the techies out there. This affects all of us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, AI is already a part of our everyday lives, and it's only going to get more integrated.
So we better figure this governance thing out. So the paper starts off by talking about different types of AI, which I guess is a good place to start. It mentions something called discriminative AI, which honestly, that sounds kind of judgmental.
Right. The name's a little misleading, maybe, but it's not as negative as it sounds. Think of it like the kind of AI that's really good at spotting patterns.
Okay, so like recognizing patterns and then making predictions based on what it's seen before.
Exactly. Like, think about your email inbox. You know how it filters out spam? That's discriminative AI at work.
Oh, okay. So it's learned what spam usually looks like and then decides if a new email fits that pattern.
Yeah, pretty much.
Cool. Okay, that makes sense. So then what about the other type of AI the paper talks about? Generative AI.
Oh, now that one is even more interesting. Generative AI, it's all about creating new content.
So instead of just recognizing patterns, it's actually making new stuff.
Yeah, it takes what it's learned and then uses that to create something totally new. Like, think about those AI image generators where you type in, like, a description and it just makes a whole new picture from your words.
Oh yeah, those are wild. Or even those AI chatbots that can, like, hold a conversation.
Exactly. All that is powered by generative AI.
Wow. It's kind of like teaching a computer to be creative.
In a way, yeah?
Okay, so we've got these different types of AI. They're getting more and more powerful. But then, what are some of the, challenges in making sure they're used responsibly?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the biggest hurdles is the data itself. The data that's used to train the AI. It's like, imagine a chef trying to make a 5-star meal, but they've only got, junk food ingredients.
Oh, okay. I see. So if the data is messed up, the AI is going to be messed up too.
Exactly. If the AI is trained on data that's biased or incomplete, it's going to reflect that in its output, and that can cause some serious problems.
Like AI making unfair decisions because it was trained on biased data.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay, so that's a big one. What else?
Well, there's also the challenge of what's called prompt engineering.
Prompt engineering.
Yeah, it sounds kind of technical, but it's basically about, asking the right questions to get the results you want from the AI.
Oh, so even if the AI is super smart, if you give it bad instructions, it's going to spit out bad results.
Yeah, exactly. You got to be really careful about how you phrase things, how you guide the AI.
Interesting. It's like you could give someone a super fancy 3D printer, but if they don't know how to use it, they're going to end up with a big mess, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so how do we even start to tackle all these challenges?
Well, the paper lays out a really helpful framework. It's called the 4 E's of AI governance.
4 E's, okay. I like it.
Oh.
Easy to remember.
Right.
So the first E is education.
Okay. Education. Making sense so far.
It's all about making sure that people have, a basic understanding of what AI is, how it works, the potential impact it can have.
So not everyone needs to be a computer scientist, but we should at least have some idea of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'm with you. What's the next E?
The second E is engineering.
Engineering. Okay.
So this is about making sure that AI systems are built with safeguards in mind, from the very beginning. Oh, okay. So it's not just about fixing problems after they pop up. It's about designing AI to be responsible right from the start.
Exactly. Baking in those ethical considerations right from the design stage.
Makes sense. So
yeah.
Education, engineering, what's the third one?
The third E is enforcement.
Okay, enforcement. So rules and regulations.
Yeah, that's where things get a bit more concrete. It's about creating actual mechanisms to make sure that AI development and deployment are following those ethical standards.
So setting up some rules of the road for how AI is used.
Exactly.
Love it. Okay, so we've got 3. Education, engineering, enforcement. What's that last E?
And last but certainly not least, the 4th E is ethics.
Ethics, right. That's the big one.
It really is. It's about putting those ethical considerations at the very heart of all AI decision making.
So it's not just a box to check. It's the foundation of how we approach AI.
Exactly. We got to be constantly asking ourselves, is this fair? Is it transparent? Is it accountable? And those questions need to be part of every single stage of, the AI life cycle.
Okay, yeah. I'm starting to see how these four E's all fit together. We need to educate people, engineer AI responsibly, enforce ethical standards, and always keep those ethical questions front and center. It seems like a pretty comprehensive approach.
It really is. And speaking of those ethical considerations, the paper also digs into some of the potential risks and fears surrounding AI, particularly with this generative AI.
Oh, right. Because generative AI can do some pretty amazing things, but I guess that also means it could be misused in some pretty scary ways.
Exactly.
So what kind of risks are we talking about here? Like, what should we be worried about?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is that AI could be used to generate and spread, misinformation.
Misinformation, right. I mean, we've already got deepfakes and all that stuff making it hard to tell what's real online.
Exactly. And it's only going to get harder as AI gets more sophisticated.
Yeah, that's kind of terrifying, honestly. Like, if anyone can create a fake video that looks totally real, how can we trust anything?
That's a big concern. And that's where those 4Es can really come in handy.
Okay, so how can the 4Es help with something like misinformation?
Well, for starters, education is key. The more people understand about how AI can be used to create these fakes, the more they'll be able to spot them and be critical of what they're seeing online.
So it's like knowing the tricks a magician uses. Once you see how the illusion works, it's not so impressive anymore.
Exactly. And enforcement can play a role too. We need ways to detect these AI-generated fakes, maybe even create penalties for intentionally creating and spreading them.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted problem.
Okay, so misinformation's a big one. What else is on the list of AI fears?
Well, there's also the issue of copyright infringement.
Copyright. How does AI play into that?
Well, remember how AI models are trained on these massive data sets? Some of that data might be protected by copyright. And so there's a risk that AI could generate content that infringes on those existing copyrights. Like, imagine, a musician finds out that an AI has created a song that sounds almost exactly like one of their own.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's tricky. How do you even determine if AI has infringed on copyright? It's not like it's directly copying and pasting.
Right, it's much more subtle. But the 4Es can help here too. Engineering, for example, could focus on designing AI models that are less likely to generate stuff that's too similar to existing copyrighted material.
Okay, so building in those safeguards at the design level.
Exactly. And then enforcement could involve setting clear guidelines for, how AI content can be used commercially and what actually constitutes infringement.
Okay. Starting to see how these 4Es are like a toolkit to address all these different issues. So what else is there?
Well, another big one is bias and discrimination.
Right. Because if AI is trained on data that's already biased, it's just going to perpetuate that bias, right?
Exactly. And that can lead to some really unfair outcomes, especially in areas like hiring or lending or even in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I've heard stories about AI being used to screen job applicants.
Yeah.
And it ends up discriminating against certain groups of people.
Yeah. And that's because of biases in the data that the AI was trained on. It's like that old saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Right. Exactly.
And again, this is where the 4Es can help. Education is crucial, People need to be aware of how AI can perpetuate biases, even if it's unintentional.
So being more aware of our own biases and how they might show up in the data we're using.
Exactly. And with engineering, we can design AI systems that are more transparent so we can actually see how they're making decisions and identify any potential biases in their algorithms.
So it's like having a window into the AI's thought process to make sure it's being fair.
Yeah, kind of.
I like it. And then what about enforcement? How could that help with bias?
Well, with enforcement, we can establish clear guidelines for data quality. And we can actually audit these AI systems to make sure they're not showing any bias in their outputs.
Oh, okay. So having checks and balances in place.
Exactly.
So we talked about misinformation, copyright, and bias. Are there even more fears on this list?
Oh, there are plenty more. The paper lists 14 in total. We've got things like privacy violations, impersonation, and even the potential for AI to generate explicit or harmful content.
Okay, so those are some pretty heavy topics.
I
think we're going to need a whole other deep dive just to unpack all of that.
Definitely.
But I think this is a good place to pause for now. We've laid the groundwork, introduced those 4Es, and given everyone a taste of just how much there is to consider when it comes to AI governance.
It's a lot to think about, but it's important stuff.
Absolutely. So We'll be back soon to tackle the rest of those fears and really dig into how we can ensure that AI is used for good in the world.
Can't wait. Welcome back, everyone. So before the break, we were talking about those 14 fears outlined in Liquid's paper, the potential downsides of AI if we're not careful.
Yeah, that was a pretty intense list. Honestly, it kind of made me think about all the ways AI could be used for things we don't want. So where do we even start with all that?
Well, the good news is the paper doesn't just leave us hanging with a bunch of anxieties. Liga actually connects those fears back to the 4E framework.
Okay, good, because those 40s seem like a pretty solid approach.
Exactly. It gives us a way to actually address these challenges.
So let's go through those fears one by one and see how those 4Es might come into play. What's the first one on the list?
The first fear the paper talks about is the potential for misinformation and disinformation.
Oh, right. Like, we're already seeing that with deepfakes and AI-generated fake news. It's getting harder and harder to tell what's real online.
Exactly, and that's only going to get worse as AI gets more sophisticated.
Yeah, that's a bit scary, honestly. If anyone can just create a fake video that looks totally real, how can we trust anything?
It's a valid concern, but again, that's where the 4Es can offer some guidance. Like, take education, for instance.
Education.
The more people understand how AI can be used to create these deepfakes, the more critical they'll be of the information they're seeing online.
Right, so it's like knowing how a magic trick works. Once you see behind the curtain, the illusion isn't so convincing anymore.
Exactly. And then enforcement could also play a role, developing ways to detect and flag these AI-generated fakes, maybe even establishing penalties for creating and spreading them intentionally.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so misinformation, that's a big one. What's next on the list?
But the next one is copyright infringement.
Copyright. How does AI even factor into copyright?
Well, remember all those massive data sets that AI models are trained on? Well, some of that data might be protected by copyright. And so there's this risk that AI could generate content that, infringes on those existing copyrights. Like, imagine a musician finds out that an AI has created a song that sounds almost exactly like one of their own.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a tough one. How do you even determine if AI has infringed on a copyright? It's not like it's directly copying and pasting, right?
Right. It's a lot more subtle than that. But again, the 4Es can offer some approaches. Like, with engineering, you could focus on developing AI models that are less likely to generate stuff that's too similar to existing copyrighted material.
So building in those safeguards right from the design stage.
Exactly. And then with enforcement, you could establish clearer guidelines for how AI-generated content can be used commercially and what actually counts as infringement.
Okay, yeah. Starting to see how those 4Es are kind of like a toolkit, right? A toolkit for addressing all these complicated AI issues.
Exactly. It's a framework for thinking about the problem.
So what other fears are on the list?
Well, a big one is bias and discrimination.
Right, because if an AI is trained on data that's already biased, it's just going to learn to be biased too, right?
Exactly. And that can lead to some really unfair outcomes,
Yeah.
especially in things like hiring, lending, or even criminal justice.
Yeah, it's like those stories you hear about AI being used to screen job applicants, and it ends up discriminating against certain groups of people.
Exactly. And it's usually because of biases that were already present in the data the AI was trained on.
It's like that old saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly. And again, 4Es can offer some potential solutions here. Like, education is crucial. People need to be aware of how AI can perpetuate these biases, even if it's unintentional.
So being more aware of our own biases and how they might show up in the data.
Exactly. And then with engineering, we can design AI systems that are more transparent. So we can actually see how they're making decisions and identify any potential biases in their algorithms.
So it's like being able to look under the hood and make sure everything's running fairly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And what about enforcement? How could that help with bias?
Well, enforcement could involve establishing clear guidelines for data quality, and we could actually audit these AI systems, to make sure they're not exhibiting bias in their output.
Oh, okay. So like having some kind of checks and balances to keep things in check.
Exactly.
Okay. So we've covered misinformation, copyright, bias. There's more, right?
Oh, yeah. We're just getting started. The paper also talks about things like privacy violations, impersonation, even the potential for AI to generate explicit or harmful content.
Okay, so now we're getting into some really serious territory.
These are some heavy topics.
Yeah, I think we'll need some time to unpack all of that.
Definitely. Let's dive into those in more detail. So first, let's talk about privacy violations.
Okay, privacy, that's a big one these days. What kind of privacy violations are we talking about with AI?
Well, as AI gets more and more sophisticated, there's a risk that it could be used to, infer sensitive information about people, even if that information isn't explicitly stated.
So like AI could figure out things about you that you haven't actually told it.
Exactly. Imagine an AI system that can analyze your online activity and then predict things about your health, your political views, even your sexual orientation, without you ever saying anything directly.
Whoa, okay. That's pretty creepy. It feels like a violation, even if you haven't technically shared that information.
It is, and it's not just about predicting things. AI could also be used to generate content that reveals private information. Like, imagine someone using AI to create a fake video of you saying or doing something that could damage your reputation.
Oh man, yeah, that's a nightmare scenario.
It is. And as the technology gets more powerful, it's only going to get easier to do that kind of thing.
So what can we do about it? How do the 4E's apply here?
Well, education can play a huge role in making people aware of these risks and how to protect themselves. We need to develop a healthy skepticism toward any kind of digital content, especially audio and video.
So basically, don't believe everything you see online.
Pretty much. And then with enforcement, we could look at creating new laws and regulations to combat this kind of AI-powered impersonation and fraud. Maybe even develop technologies that can detect deepfakes and, authenticate real content.
It sounds like we're going to need a whole new set of tools to deal with all of this.
We probably will, but it's important to start thinking about it now.
Okay, so we've talked about privacy. What about impersonation? What kind of risks does AI pose there?
Well, the ability for AI to mimic human voices and create these realistic deepfakes, it means that it could be used for impersonation and identity fraud, on a scale we've never seen before.
Yeah, like getting a phone call from what sounds exactly like your bank, but it's actually an AI trying to scam you.
Exactly. And as AI gets better at mimicking human voices, it's going to be almost impossible to tell the difference.
Man, that's freaky. And I thought robocalls were bad enough already.
It's a whole new level of scary.
So how do those 4E's help us with that?
Well, with education, we can start making people aware of these new scams and how to protect themselves. We need to be much more critical of what we see and hear online, not just take things at face value.
Right, because seeing is no longer believing.
Exactly. And enforcement could involve creating new laws and regulations specifically to combat AI-powered impersonation and fraud.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered misinformation, copyright bias, privacy, impersonation. What's left on that list of AI fears?
Well, there's one more we need to talk about. The generation of explicit or harmful content.
Right, because if AI can be used to create art and music, it can probably also be used to create things that are, well, not so great.
Exactly. And that's where those ethical considerations become really important.
That fourth E, right? Ethics. How does that apply here?
It's about making sure that AI is used to create content that aligns with our values, that it's not being used to cause harm. It's about asking those tough questions about what's acceptable and what crosses the line.
So like having some ethical guidelines for what AI can and can't be used to create.
Exactly. And it's not just about what AI creates, but also how it's accessed and distributed.
Right, because even if you have an AI that's programmed to be ethical, if it falls into the wrong hands, it could still be used for bad stuff.
Exactly. So it's a complex issue.
So how do the other 4E's come into play here?
Well, education can help raise awareness about the potential for AI to be used to create harmful content. Educating people about the risks and encouraging them to use AI responsibly.
Okay, education, always a good starting point. What about engineering?
Engineering could focus on developing AI systems that are less likely to generate this kind of harmful or offensive content, maybe building in filters or safeguards to prevent certain types of content from being created in the first place.
So making sure that AI isn't just capable of creating anything, but that it's also guided by some ethical boundaries.
Exactly. And then enforcement could involve creating regulations that actually prohibit the use of AI to generate certain types of content, or holding platforms accountable for the content that's created using their AI tools.
Okay, yeah. So it's like we need to be thinking about this from all angles.
I do. It's a multifaceted problem that requires a multifaceted solution.
Well, this has been a really insightful discussion. It's clear that there are some serious challenges to think about as AI gets more powerful. But it's also been reassuring to hear about how those 4E's can help us address these challenges.
Absolutely. It's important to be realistic about the risks, but also, optimistic about our ability to navigate them, as long as we're approaching AI thoughtfully and proactively.
I like that. Okay, well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, but there's still one big question we haven't really addressed yet. What can we as individuals do to make sure that AI is developed and used responsibly? I mean, we're not all AI experts or policymakers.
That's a great question. And it's one we'll definitely tackle in the final part of our deep dive. Stay tuned.
Okay, so we've talked about the different types of AI. We've got the 4E framework, and we even went through those 14 fears that League's paper lays out.
Yeah.
It's been a lot to take in.
It has. But like we said, knowledge is power. Right.
Yeah. The more we understand about AI and all the challenges that come with it, the better equipped we'll be to deal with it all.
Exactly.
But, I think a lot of people listening are probably wondering the same thing I am. Like, okay, this is all very interesting, but what can we actually do about it, as individuals?
Yeah, it's one thing to talk about these big ideas, but how do we actually make a difference?
Right. We're not all AI experts.
No.
We're not all policymakers. So what can the average person actually do to make sure AI is used responsibly?
That's a great question. And I think it requires a little bit of a shift in mindset.
Okay. Mindset shift. I like that.
Yeah, because we tend to think of AI as something that's, out there, something that's happening in like tech labs or government meetings.
Right. It's like this big mysterious thing.
Exactly. But the truth is, we all have a role to play in shaping the future of AI.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about waiting for like the experts to figure it out.
Nope. We all have agency here. Every time you use an AI-powered tool, every time you click on a recommendation, you're kind of casting a vote for the kind of AI you want to see in the world.
Oh, okay. I see. So it's like being a conscious consumer, but for AI.
Exactly.
I like that.
So start by, just being aware of how AI is being used in your own life. What products and services rely on AI? Are they transparent about how they're using your data? Are they taking steps to, mitigate bias?
So it starts with just like asking questions and doing a little research.
Exactly.
Okay, that seems doable. What else?
And if you find a company that's, not being responsible with AI, well, vote with your wallet. Support the companies that are committed to doing things ethically.
Okay, yeah. So awareness and conscious choices, that's a good start. Anything else?
Well, remember that first E in the framework? Education.
Yeah, education.
That applies to all of us. The more we learn about AI, how it works, the more we'll be able to have these informed discussions, advocate for responsible use.
So educating ourselves so we can then go out and educate others.
Exactly. Talk to your friends and family about these issues. Share articles, podcasts, heck, share this episode. Anything that can help shed some light on AI governance.
Right, because the more people who are informed, the more we can push for change.
Exactly. And if you're feeling really motivated, you could even get involved with organizations that are, working on ethical AI.
Oh, yeah, like groups that are advocating for data privacy or algorithmic transparency.
Exactly. There are a ton of great organizations out there doing important work.
Okay, so it's not just about talking the talk, it's also about walking the walk and supporting the people who are fighting for ethical AI.
That's a great way to put it. And here's another thought. Remember how the paper mentioned job displacement as one of the fears?
Oh, yeah. AI taking our jobs.
Right. Well, one of the best ways to deal with that fear is to embrace lifelong learning.
So basically, just keep learning and adapting. I mean, that's good advice in general, right? Not just with AI.
It is. But it's especially important now as AI starts to automate more tasks. We need to focus on those uniquely human skills that AI, at least for now, can't replicate.
So things like creativity, critical thinking, emotional intelligence.
Exactly.
Okay, so instead of being afraid of AI, we should see it as an opportunity to evolve and really focus on what makes us human.
That's the spirit. AI can be this incredibly powerful tool for good, but it's up to us to make sure it's used that way. It's not about being anti-AI, it's about being pro-humanity.
Well said. I think this deep dive has really opened my eyes to how important AI governance is and how we all have a role to play in making sure it's done right. It's not just about tech, it's about ethics, it's about humanity, and it's about making sure that this incredible technology actually serves us, not the other way around.
I couldn't agree more. The future of AI is being written right now, and we all have a say in how that story unfolds.
That's a great way to put it. So to all our listeners out there, we hope this deep dive has left you feeling informed, maybe a little empowered, and definitely ready to join this conversation.
Yeah, keep diving deep and stay curious.
That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for listening.